On a freezing Christmas night in 1776, a desperate general led his starving soldiers into a blinding blizzard across an ice-choked river. Everyone thought this reckless midnight mission was absolute suicide against the mighty, well-trained British forces. Instead, against all odds, it turned out to be the most astonishing and audacious gamble in the entire history of military warfare. To the greatest and most powerful empire on Earth, the American rebellion seemed like nothing more than a temporary disturbance, one that would soon fade into history. George Washington had just suffered a devastating loss in New York, and his once proud army was rapidly shrinking down. To make matters worse, the brutal winter freeze threatened to completely wipe out the remaining handful of loyal patriots. But deep in the freezing darkness of December, Washington finally came to terms with a terrifying and unavoidable reality. He realized with absolute certainty that he could never hope to beat the professional British Army in fair combat. So, he decided to completely reinvent the art of warfare to catch his powerful enemies totally off guard. He designed a hidden master plan that would shatter a global empire without ever winning a classic battlefield victory. Looking back, the entire summer of 1776 had turned out to be an absolute and unmitigated catastrophe for the army. British General William Howe skillfully outflanked Washington on multiple critical fronts across the contested territory. They successfully trapped the outnumbered Patriot forces directly against the freezing currents of the wide East River.
Ruthless enemy advances quickly drove the colonial defenders completely out of their stronghold in New York.
The battered army was then chased relentlessly across the muddy plains of New Jersey, under constant threat of destruction. They were ultimately forced to retreat deep into the safety of the Pennsylvania backcountry to lick their wounds. Within weeks, Washington's active forces dwindled down to barely a few thousand cold, starving, and demoralized men. To make matters even more desperate, the mandatory enlistment contracts for most of these soldiers were about to expire.
High-ranking officials inside the British Parliament back in London firmly believed that the colonial conflict was finished.
Meanwhile, hopeful loyalists living in occupied New York openly predicted the immediate and total submission of the states. If General George Washington simply sat back and did nothing during this dark hour, the revolution would collapse. Washington discovered that the German Hessian garrison stationed in Trenton was planning holiday celebrations.
He knew for certain that these foreign mercenary troops would lower their guard and indulge heavily in festivities.
Taking full advantage of the heavy darkness and a blinding winter sleet storm, the secret operation finally began. Exactly 2,400 brave Patriot men climbed aboard cramped, wooden, flat-bottomed Durham transport boats.
Monstrous blocks of freezing river ice slammed aggressively against the fragile wooden hulls throughout the crossing.
Few journeys are as perilous as the river run in winter. For these magnificent creatures, the sound of the grinding ice was a symphony of fear. Heavy bronze artillery pieces also had to be hauled manually across the treacherous, freezing waters with immense effort. The battered assault force finally managed to land on the opposite shore, several hours behind their original schedule. Ahead of them lay an exhausting and punishing 9-mile march, straight through a relentless and blinding snowstorm. Because their boots had completely disintegrated weeks prior, numerous soldiers were forced to march entirely barefoot. Every step forward left clear, tragic trails of bright crimson blood frozen directly onto the cold winter ground. When the American vanguard finally descended upon the unsuspecting town of Trenton shortly after 8 o'clock, the foreign Hessian garrison was caught completely unprepared and trapped in absolute tactical confusion. In less than 9 minutes of intense urban fighting, the historic surprise engagement was entirely concluded.
Over 900 professional enemy soldiers were successfully captured as prisoners of war during the clash.
Miraculously, despite the impossible odds and freezing weather, there were precisely 0 American combat deaths recorded.
Buoyed by the stunning triumph at Trenton and a subsequent clever victory at Princeton days later, General Washington arrived at a profound realization regarding the limits of his fledgling military forces.
He knew he could never survive large-scale, traditional linear combat against elite European professional regiments.
Drawing deep inspiration from the classic tactics of ancient Roman commander Fabius Maximus,
Washington pioneered a masterful doctrine built entirely around strategic avoidance, endurance, and clever deception. Instead of holding territory at all costs, he successfully converted tactical retreats into an active offensive weapon. He lured the frustrated British forces deep into unfamiliar and hostile American backcountry environments.
This prolonged war of movement rapidly bled the Crown's financial reserves and strained their global supply lines. British field commanders grew increasingly desperate and exhausted as they chased an elusive enemy that refused to break.
While enemy main forces comfortably occupied major coastal cities like New York and Philadelphia, Washington quietly constructed an elite, highly secretive espionage network, operating entirely in the shadows.
This shadow organization relied on ordinary local shopkeepers, trusted farmers, and brave housewives as agents. They utilized secret, invisible chemical inks developed by brilliant patriot physicians to transmit vital intelligence.
Washington effectively weaponized widespread disinformation to manipulate enemy commanders into making fatal assumptions. Carefully forged letters detailing entirely fictitious battle plans were intentionally allowed to fall into enemy hands.
Elaborate decoy camps featuring minimal troop numbers and scattered campfires were constructed across wide sectors. British intelligence repeatedly fell for these clever traps, wasting precious weeks chasing literal military ghosts. By the golden arrival of autumn in the fateful year of 1781, the grand stage was finally set. Washington prepared to execute the single most intricate and brilliant military deception of the entire century. British General Lord Charles Cornwallis had chosen to fortify his primary army along the coast of Yorktown. Cornwallis sat securely in his coastal stronghold, blindly waiting for promised Royal Navy rescue fleets from the sea. In total secrecy, Washington orchestrated a massive fake military buildup targeting the northern outskirts of New York. Dozens of extensive decoy tent cities were constructed to convince enemy spies of an imminent major northern assault.
Elaborate fraudulent supply requisitions were deliberately leaked to ensure British High Command remained fixated.
Meanwhile, away from prying eyes, the main Allied Franco-American army broke camp and began a rapid southern march.
Elite French regular regiments led by General Rochambeau marched shoulder to shoulder with veteran Continentals.
This massive combined force raced southward across multiple states at a blistering and unprecedented tactical speed. Simultaneously, the powerful French naval fleet, commanded by Admiral de Grasse, swept northward from Caribbean waters. They arrived precisely on schedule, entering the wide waters of the strategic Chesapeake Bay without resistance. De Grasse quickly established an impenetrable naval blockade, sealing off Cornwallis from any possible escape by sea. Hemmed in tightly on all land sides by Allied forces and cut off completely by sea, the British garrison was doomed.
Relentless Allied siege artillery opened fire day and night, turning British earthworks into pulverized rubble.
Lord Cornwallis finally realized too late that he had been completely outmatched and outmaneuvered by Washington. On the historic morning of October 19, 1781, clear autumn sunlight illuminated the final surrender field. More than 7,000 humbled British soldiers marched slowly out from their shattered defensive fortifications. In somber silence, they proceeded to officially lay down their weapons in front of the victorious Allied armies.
Across the Atlantic in London, British Prime Minister Lord North received the devastating news with absolute shock. He paced his study in utter despair, repeatedly crying out to his advisors that the American war was over.
This incredible conflict was ultimately won, not through brute military force or endless battlefield bloodshed,
but through unmatched human endurance, brilliant psychological warfare, and an unwavering commitment to freedom. Through careful planning and visionary leadership, Washington transformed a ragtag rebellion into an unstoppable force. The brilliant strategies deployed during these dark years successfully changed the geopolitical map of the world. Winter camps tested the absolute limits of human endurance. proving that an army could survive on sheer willpower. Local militias provided crucial intelligence and constant guerrilla pressure that drained enemy resources every day. Communications relied on brave couriers riding day and night through dangerous enemy patrols across the colonies. Invisible messages crossed enemy lines safely, hidden cleverly inside hollow buttons and double-soled leather boots. The home front endured severe shortages of tea, cloth, salt, and everyday household essentials throughout the conflict. Brave women managed farms and local businesses, while their husbands and sons fought miles away from home.
Local printing presses produced fiery essays by Thomas Paine that kept the flame of liberty burning brightly everywhere.
Every ordinary citizen became an active participant in an unprecedented global experiment in democratic self-governance. The Founding Fathers debated tirelessly in Philadelphia, drafting documents that would alter human history forever. Spies, soldiers, and statesmen had all played their silent parts in a grand and complex geopolitical chess match.
The legendary Delaware River Crossing remains an immortal global symbol of courage against impossible winter odds.
The surprise raid at Trenton proved definitively that calculated timing could alter the momentum of a war. Baron von Steuben's rigorous European drilling turned ragged volunteers into an elite fighting machine. The decisive siege of Yorktown delivered the final masterstroke that brought the greatest empire to its knees. Without critical French naval support and financial backing, the American Revolution might have failed entirely. Diplomatic efforts in Paris matched the tactical brilliance of Washington's forces on the American battlefields.
Benjamin Franklin brilliantly charmed the French royal court, securing the vital alliance that won the war.
The ultimate cost of freedom was paid in heavy blood, severe sacrifice, frostbite, and unwavering dedication. Naval skirmishes along the Atlantic coast kept British supply lines constantly threatened by privateer ships. Prisoners of war faced harsh conditions aboard crowded British prison ships anchored in New York Harbor. Despite immense suffering, the spirit of independence never wavered among the rank-and-file patriot troops. The principles forged in fire during these brutal years would eventually inspire democratic movements worldwide. Decades later, the brilliant strategies of endurance studied by Washington are still taught in military academies. The enduring legacy of 1776 reminds us that mighty empires can fall to relentless ideas and freedom. History is continually shaped by ordinary people who refuse to surrender when the odds are against them. The echoes of liberty continue to resonate across generations, reminding us of the price of our rights. Every monument and battlefield stands as a silent witness to the sacrifices of the founding generation.
Thank you for joining us on this immersive cinematic journey through the untold strategies of the revolution.
Make sure to hit that like button right now if this video changed the way you look at history. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive.
We proudly uncover the greatest tactical minds and forgotten turning points from world history every week.
Leave a comment below telling us what historical event or ancient city you want us to investigate next.